Good evening, everyone. I'd like to dedicate our talk tonight to a refuah shalema, to a speedy recovery, to all those throughout the world that are battling this illness, that are battling this virus, and that indeed God should show mercy and God should send a speedy recovery to all that are ill and to heal our world. The topic today is a very difficult one, for it touches upon life's most challenging question: faith and suffering. You see, faith is easy when all is going well. However, when we find ourselves in difficult moments, when we find ourselves struggling to cope, when there's real pain, when there's real suffering, it becomes very difficult to talk about faith. Yet to hide from this question leaves a void in our search for understanding, our understanding of religion, our understanding of Judaism, our understanding of God, our understanding of finding meaning and fulfillment in our lives, our understanding of what faith itself is all about. So we must talk about this subject, for life does include pain and suffering. And our challenge must be to find fulfillment even when we find ourselves in the most difficult of times. Now, I don't intend on answering all of your questions on suffering, for your questions are my questions. But I'd like to share some thoughts, some perspective, perhaps some insight into the Jewish response, the Torah response to suffering, to pain, and to tragedy. We have a gift that's been given to us that offers so much. The gift is the book of the Torah. You see, it's not only a book of laws, it's not only a book about mitzvot, it's not only a book of commandments, but it's also about a way of life. Torah, the word itself means hora, teachings. It provides us with a guidebook for all moments of life. So I'd like to present to you two models: the Genesis model and the Exodus model. The model that we see coming forth from the book of Genesis, and then the model that we see from the book of Exodus. The book of Genesis deals with our patriarchs and matriarchs. And it's interesting that we find through the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, that they never questioned. They were the recipients of the struggles. The struggles was happening to them, and yet they didn't question. Let's take a quick look on the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham was tested by God 10 times, to see that his faith was complete. And nowhere do we find him complaining to God, "How can you do this to me?" And he would have had every right to. God comes to him and says, "Lech lecha, I need you to go to a new place, and there I will bless you, and I will bless your offsprings," blessing after blessing in that very first revelation that God has to Abraham. And God sends him on his way, and he sends him to the land, to the promised land, to the land flowing with milk and honey. Now he's there on a mission from God. God sent him, and you would expect everything to work out just perfectly. And as soon as he gets there, the Torah tells us there's a hunger in the land. Why doesn't he turn to God and say, "Hey, you told me to come here. What's going on?" No, he doesn't question. He has to make his way to Egypt. And when he comes to Egypt, his wife is taken prisoner. And again, he can ask the question, "God, why are you doing this to me? You told me to come here." No question. And on this goes in the life of Abraham. 10 times he's challenged until the final one of these 10 tests, the most famous of all, the binding of Isaac. Now, one can say that Abraham, although he faced difficult days, nevertheless, he never faced suffering, because after all, even though his wife was taken prisoner, she was released, and he was given many, many gifts, and he had great blessings that came to him. And yeah, truly, he was asked about the binding of his son, but it didn't actually happen. He didn't have to go through with it. So there was no actual suffering that he went through. Let's take a look at Isaac. He also displays faith at the binding of Isaac. He's not a little child, as many believe. He's 37 years old at the time, and he faces struggles in life, but he never complains. Now, one can say, okay, he may have had some difficulties in his life, but we don't see suffering, which leads to Jacob. Jacob suffers. He's born a twin of Esau, and that wasn't a picnic. And he has to run for his life from his brother. His own brother is chasing after him to kill him. And then he has to live by his Uncle Laban for 22 years, who deceives him, who makes life difficult for him. And then when he has to run away from his Uncle Laban, he has to face Esau once again, who wants to kill him. And if that's not bad enough, on this journey back home, his daughter Dinah is captured, his daughter Dinah is raped. And then Rachel, his beloved wife, dies on the road. And then after that, we get the story of 22 years of grief of not knowing the whereabouts of his son Joseph. His first peaceful years of his entire life was the last 17 years of his life. He lived a very difficult life, and yet we don't find him complaining. Grieving, yes. Praying, yes. Fighting back, yes. But no complaining. He accepts. God knows what he's doing. He accepts what comes his way. So our first model the Bible demonstrates to us in the book of Genesis is this strong faith in God, believing and feeling that God knows what he's doing, accepting what comes your way. Yet keep in mind that the suffering that we talk about in the book of Genesis is a personal one. They are the subjects of the pain. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the stories we told, they are the subjects of it. Now let's take a look at the Exodus model. If we look into the Torah, we can find a model example how one of our greatest leaders dealt with suffering, especially here, the suffering of others. The book of Exodus. The book of Exodus opens with the Jews in Egypt. They're called the Hebrews. They are enslaved by the Egyptians. And we learn about the birth of an individual named Moses. Moses is raised in two worlds, in his parents' home in his youth and in the house of Pharaoh as he grows up. Now, the Torah just gives us short snapshots of his life, just enough so that we can develop an understanding of his character, of his personality. 4 such snapshots that the Torah gives us. That's all the Torah will really tell us about the first 80 years of his life. Snapshot number 1. He saw an Egyptian beating upon a Jew, and he gets involved because this man Moses cannot tolerate injustice. Snapshot number 2. He sees one Jew fighting with another Jew, and again he gets involved because he cannot tolerate hatred. Snapshot number 3. He saw shepherds in Midian harassing women, and again he gets involved because he cannot tolerate the strong picking on the weak. And snapshot number 4, very simple. He's a good shepherd. He cares for his flock. He cares for each and every single one of his sheep. That's the narrative that we get of the first 80 years of his life. Now, we'll get much more information about the next 40 years. But for 2/3 of his life, just these snapshots. And it's enough because it shows us his character. Moses sees a burning bush and hears the voice of God. And God tells him that 210 years is long enough. It's time for the Jews to go home. The suffering must come to an end. Moses is excited about the end of slavery, but he doesn't feel worthy of accepting the role of a leader. It is his humility that prevents him from accepting the job at first. Who am I, Moshe says. You say that you have heard their cries, so you take them out. So God says, I will be with you. Moses says, who are you, Ma Shemo? How do I convince the Jews that you have sent me? And God responds with the famous, Ehya Asha Ehya. I will be what I will be, in various different commentaries on what that means. And then God gives him clear instructions of what to say and what to do and what to say to the Jews and how to convince them. And Moshe comes back with, but they won't believe me. So God gives him signs and miracles to prove his legitimacy. And this debate goes on and on and on. We're taught that this debate went on for 7 days. For 7 days, Moses is standing at this burning bush, and God's trying to convince him that he should go to Pharaoh and he should lead the Jewish people out of Egypt. And Moses is saying to God, there's got to be some mistake. You have to mean someone else. It can't be me. God's talking to a human being for 7 days, arguing with him to take the job. Now, what's developing here in the 7-day period is this personal, private lesson by God about the way he operates things. Moses, we can say, is actually milking this for information with all the questions he has an opportunity to throw at God and try to get an understanding of how God works. Could you imagine if you had the opportunity to talk to God, to ask the questions you always wanted to ask, and to actually hear the voice with the answers? And so Moses is in no rush to end this conversation because he's getting a lot of information. He's building this relationship directly with God. And finally, after 7 days, Moses has no choice. Enough is enough, God says, it's time for you to go. And he makes his way to Egypt. And to his great surprise, the Jewish people believe him. And they begin to celebrate. We're going home. It's time to pack the bags. Get the suitcase ready. God's redeeming us from bondage. The celebration begins. And then Moses goes before Pharaoh with the request. Ko amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael. So says the Lord, the God of Israel. Shalach es ami v'yavduni. Let my people go so that they may serve me. And he's given a very sharp response. Pharaoh says to him, who is God that I should listen to his voice? And Pharaoh is enraged. He's enraged by the audacity of even the thought of asking for the release of the slaves. Now, I want to read to you real quickly from Exodus chapter 5, verse number 1. Just to set the scene, Moses is in front of Pharaoh. He makes the request. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron came and they said to Pharaoh, so says the Lord God of Israel, send out my people and let them sacrifice to me in the desert. Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should heed his voice to let Israel out? I do not know the Lord, neither will I let Israel out. And they said, the God of the Hebrews has happened upon us. Now let us go on a 3-day journey in the desert and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he strike us with a plague or with the sword. But the king of Egypt said to them, why, Moses and Aaron, do you disturb the people from their work? Go to your own labors. And Pharaoh said, behold, now the people of the land are many, and you are stopping them from their labors. So on that day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, you shall not continue to give stubble to the people to make the bricks like yesterday and the day before yesterday. Let them go and gather stubble for themselves. But the number of bricks they have been making yesterday and the day before yesterday, you shall impose upon them. You shall not reduce it, for they are lax. Therefore they cry out, saying, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Let the labor fall heavy upon the men, and let them work at it, and let them not talk about false matters. So the taskmasters of the people and the officers came out and spoke to the people, saying, so said Pharaoh, I am not giving you stubble. You go and take for yourself stubble from wherever you find it, because nothing will be reduced from your work. So the people scattered throughout the entire land of Egypt to gather gleaning for stubble. And the taskmasters were pressing them, saying, finish your work, the requirement of each day and its day, just as there was when there was stubble. And the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had appointed over them, were beaten, saying, why have you not completed your quota to make bricks like the day before yesterday, neither yesterday nor today? So the officers of the children of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, why do you do this to your servant? Stubble is not given to your servants, but they tell us, make bricks. And behold, your servants are beaten, and your people are sinning. So you get what's going on here? Pharaoh says, yeah, Moses, you want to let them out? No. Not only they're not going out, but I'm going to make matters worse for your friends here, for the slaves. Up until now, they were given the bricks at the site that they needed to build. And they were given a quota of how many bricks needed to be laid that day. But from now on, thanks to you, Moses, thanks to your request, I am not supplying any material. They need to go out throughout the land and find the material to make the bricks. But the quota must be the same, which is impossible. You cannot have the same quota from one day to the next one. One day you're being supplied the bricks, the next day make your own bricks. And so they were being beaten by Pharaoh and his taskmasters for not filling the quotas. They came to Moses and Aaron and they said, May the Lord look upon you and judge you, for you have brought us into a foul odor in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of his servants to place a sword into their hands to kill us. Thank you very much, Moses. This is what you did to us. You gave them a sword to kill us. Verse 22. I prepared you for this. Moses is about to unleash a complaint against God. It's more than just a complaint. Listen to his words. It's a protest using the strongest language. He hides no words. Verse 22 is one of the most powerful verses of the Bible. Chapter 5. Moses returns to the Lord and says, "O Lord, why have you done evil to your people? Why did you send me? Since I have come to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has harmed this people. You have not saved your people." The verse is so powerful. It is so honest. And from this one verse, we can learn so much about our question. I'd like to make with you 11 observations. Number one, there is no religion in the world that would have recorded in its holiest book, its leading man, its holy man, its prophet, unleashing an attack like this on God. This should prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt the honesty of the Torah. Moshe is upset with God, and his words are recorded for all of us to read and to study for all eternity. Any man that would have written this Bible would have deleted this verse right away. But God placed it in the Bible, in the Torah, for us to study, for us to learn. Observation number two. We have always believed that if God would only come talk to us, everything would be okay. I have some doubts, I have some confusion, I have some questions about my faith, but if God would merely come to me and say, "Good morning, Moshe," and he would have a conversation with me, everything would be okay, because I know that God is watching over me. How can anything not be okay? How much more so if we had a full conversation, right? Wrong. Moses stood with God and conversed with him for 7 days. And yet he's more confused than the rest of the Jewish people. He's the one that's yelling. This, by the way, is critical to our pursuit and our understanding of Judaism. It's okay if we're upset. It's okay if we're confused. It's okay, as the very word Yisrael means, if we are wrestling with God. Number three, we must separate faith that there is a God with faith that everything is okay. Moshe knows there is a God. He has no doubts there is a God. His problem is that he just witnessed the suffering of others. Not the Genesis model that he is the one suffering. He is watching other people suffering. He is watching with horror as Jews are being beaten for not fulfilling an impossible quota. Jews are crying in pain. And Moshe says, it's not okay. He protests, he fights, he battles because it's not okay. It's not a condition he can accept. He can't go to sleep at night. He can't even function during the day. Most surprising is God's response, observation number 4. There is none. Yes, there is a response, but it's not one that answers Moshe's question, that silences Moshe's attack. We find no verse that says, "How dare you talk to me this way, Moshe?" The earth doesn't open up and swallow him up. I read you the very next verse of chapter 6, verse 1. And the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a mighty hand he will send them out, and with a mighty hand he will drive them out of his land." God assures him that all will be well. Just adjusting this a moment. Here we go. But he offers no excuse, no justification for the suffering. He doesn't explain to Moshe why that had to happen. He doesn't answer Moshe why the beatings needed to take place. I am sure he could. I am sure God had a reason, but he chose not to respond to Moshe with it. And on top of that, he chose to record Moshe's verbal attack in the Torah left unanswered, so that we, today, in the year 2020, 5,780, discussing this most difficult subject, will know that it's okay for us to question. I would go a step further. God wants us to question suffering. He doesn't want us to become comfortable with it. He wants us, upon seeing someone in pain, to cry out from the depths of our hearts and souls, Lama Hareosa. Why are you doing this to this person? He deserves better. I expected better from you. It's so honest. It's so true. We don't have to hide our true feelings, nor should we. Observation number 5 on this verse 22. Just to throw the word faith in someone's face who is in pain, of where's your faith, is so cold. It is so arrogant. We need to recognize the emotional or physical or psychological pain, that it's real. It really does hurt. And we can't just brush it away with words. There's a story I heard of a rabbi whose daughter was in a car accident in Nebuch, and she didn't survive. The students heard about it, but their teacher was unaware. And one of them needed to break the bad news, the tragic news. And so one student was selected to inform their Rebbe, their teacher, of what happened. And so the student says to his Rebbe, I remember you teaching us a verse. You taught us a teaching from the Talmud that says, Kishem shemavorach ala tov mevorach ala ra. The same way that one thanks God for the good that happens in one's life, one should thank God for the bad. I don't understand this, the student says to his Rebbe. Can you explain this to me? And the Rebbe goes and gives this long discourse on understanding the tremendous growth that comes through pain, and that we don't understand it, but in the truest reality, in the highest realms of the highest worlds, it's really all good. So the student says, so does that mean that just like you dance at your daughter's wedding is the same way you would dance upon hearing bad news? And so the Rebbe says, philosophically, yes, that's what I'm saying. To which the student says, Rebbe, start dancing. And he told the Rebbe of this tragedy, that his daughter was involved in a car accident and she didn't survive. And the Rebbe fainted. And then when he revived, he said to his student, suddenly the Talmud makes no sense to me. You see, there's an intellectual understanding perhaps of suffering, but it doesn't work for the one who is suffering, for the one who is in pain. Number 6, God's first words after this verse 22 is, now you will see. Now you will see. Perhaps the interpretation is now. Now we have a leader. I believe that if Moshe had turned to the Jews and said, don't worry about a thing, God said it's all going to be okay, while their backs are bloody from being whipped, perhaps this would have been the response of a man of great faith, but not of a leader, and not of a caring person, and not of a warm person. Moshe cares. He feels their pain. He feels their suffering. And so he cries out, if this is your plan, God, I want no part of it. This is exactly the leader that God was looking for. Now Now you will see. Number 7. Moses says it's bad enough that Pharaoh said no to the request that I made in your name. But not only did he say no, he intensified the exile. He made things worse. My coming to Pharaoh did not bring any salvation. It brought a curse. I raised the hopes of the Jewish people, and for their faith, what did they get? They got beatings. And I did it to them. I feel responsible. Notice he doesn't say, okay, God, what next? What's next on the checklist to do? No, something is wrong. Something is very wrong. And I'm not able to continue in this role unless there is some relief. Number 8, Moses seems to be more upset with God than he is with Pharaoh. He expects evil from a Pharaoh. But how could God allow it? Worse, how could God set him up for this? He was in on it. Why did you do evil to your people? Was Moshe's challenge. Number 9, I believe that Moshe a few months earlier would never have spoken this way. I believe that only after the burning bush, after the closeness of this relationship, could Moshe speak this way. Because you're more disappointed when someone you love, when someone you feel close to lets you down than when a stranger does. Moshe was now in a relationship. I thought I knew you. I thought you were straight with me. What happened here? The close relationship demands the protest. Number 10, the atheist or the agnostic has very little to complain about, at least when it comes to God. You can't blame a God you don't believe in, nor can you blame a God that has nothing to do with you. The struggle for so many in dealing with the Holocaust was, where were you, God? Which implies a belief that there is a God. And we expected more because we have a relationship. And that's why, and that's when there's frustration and there's disappointment. And number 11, in God's response, he tries building the faith that indeed there will be redemption. Now you will see, boosting the confidence that there will be redemption. But he's very careful about not suppressing the compassion. He doesn't want to suppress the compassion that Moshe feels about his fellow. And that, my dear friends, is so critical for us to understand. Faith does not and should not contradict compassion for one who is suffering. Faith does not and should not contradict crying out when one is in pain or when one sees someone in pain. Faith does not and should not contradict wrestling with God about a tragedy. In fact, it's only because we have faith that we can. As a rabbi, I find myself many times having to deal with families who experience tragedies. I remember when I first started some 36 years ago, I thought that it was our job to take the standard line, be strong, have faith. We don't understand the ways of the Lord. The typical rabbi speech. I remember about 25 years ago, I was woken early in the morning by the phone. The caller told me that there was a terrible accident. A small plane on its way back from Las Vegas had gone down near Lancaster. And the plane was carrying 3 members of one family, 2 brothers and a sister. And the father was just informed, and he lives in Agora Hills. So get over there real fast. I ran into my car. In those few minutes of driving between my house and the address that I was given, I start thinking about, what am I going to say? What can you possibly say? Be strong. Have faith. We don't know the ways of the Lord. Can I say that to a man who just found out that he lost 3 children? I came to the house, and I remember there was this woman outside the door, and she looked at me and she said this line, "What do you want here? What do you want here?" And I was speechless because it came to me like a ton of bricks falling on my shoulders. As a rabbi, I was representing God. I was representing religion. I was representing faith. I was on his side, and he did this. So what are you doing here? I entered the house. I don't remember saying much, because sometimes it's not about words. It's just about compassion. When there is a tragedy, it's not okay. Years ago, there was a young father of 3 children who passed away in Borough Park a month before the holiday of Passover. And after the Shiva, the widow knew that she needed to be strong for her children. Passover was coming. She was going to try to make the holiday as joyous as she could. And she took them shopping for clothes, and she took them to a shoe store, and the shopkeeper there gave each one a beautiful helium balloon. And the youngest of the children was a 3-year-old, took the balloon, ran outside the store, and let the balloon go. And the mother's all embarrassed with her young one. "Why did you do that? The man gave you a balloon as a gift. It wasn't really nice. He just let the balloon go right in front of him." And this 3-year-old child says, Mommy, I gave it to Daddy because Daddy didn't get one. So I wanted Daddy to have mine." When there are young widows and orphans, it's not okay. And you get a call from a parent whose child was just diagnosed with some life-threatening disease. It's not okay. You walk through the children's ward of any hospital and you see the faces of parents and the faces of siblings, the faces of children. No, it's not okay. My friends, we are facing a worldwide pandemic that has brought pain and fear and illness to hundreds of thousands. I doubt there's a single person that is watching this right now that does not know someone with the virus, that does not know someone fighting for their lives. Has there ever been a time in your lifetime when we could make a statement like that? Not a single one of us does not know someone who's fighting for their lives. Each day we hear about the passing of another acquaintance. 2 days ago, a classmate of mine. Yesterday, a camp counselor. It hurts. It hurts deeply. I did my Pesach shopping yesterday. It was different than any Pesach shopping I've ever done. The stores only allow a few people in at a time, and so everyone's lined up outside, but 6 to 10 feet apart from each other. Simple Jewish people trying to fulfill a commandment to keep the Passover. With masks, with gloves. And when you finally get into the store, you see the anxiety on people's faces. People are afraid. They don't know if they can pass you in the aisle. They don't know if they're allowed to get close to you. They want to reach out and get a product. And you just see the panic in people's faces. I came out of the store, my cart was overflowing, and they didn't want to put some of the stuff in a second cart because then they would have to help me to my car. And part of their rules now that you have to take it all out yourself. So the cart is overflowing, there's bags from everywhere. I'm trying to maneuver my cart in the parking lot, and there's one of those speed bumps, and I simply could not get the cart over the speed bump without the bags flying everywhere. And one of the congregants from my shul was there and waiting in her line for the hours that she would have to wait. And she sees her rabbi struggling to get this cart, and she comes naturally, just running to help. And I say, no, you have to stand back. We're not even allowed to be ourselves, to simply reach out and help someone, lest we get too close. And at a time like this, our natural instinct is to run to places of worship, to be with each other, to pray together. And we can't even do that. They're all closed. It's not okay. Children and grandchildren went to visit their parents and their bubbies and their zaydis a few weeks ago, showing respect and honor as we've been commanded to do, as we've been raised to do, as we've been trained to do. And unbeknownst to them, they were transmitting a deadly virus to their own loving grandparents. Some Holocaust survivors, couples who survived the communists, Siberia, heroes and elders of our community are passing away without even a farewell of a funeral by their loved ones, by their families, by their students. You can't even visit a home for Shiva to pay your condolences for these heroes of our community. Or even for a family to say the Kaddish in shul, we can't even do that. It's not okay. We need to feel the pain that Moses felt when he cried out to God Almighty, Lama harayai salam hazeh. Why are you dealing so harshly with your people, with humanity? We're begging you, God Almighty, please have mercy. We need to pray like we've never prayed before. Yes, in solitary, but from the deepest depths of our heart and soul, no more. No more. I want to share a story with you. 46 years ago, the state of Israel faced one of the greatest threats to its existence when massive Arab armies mobilized and launched a major attack on its borders on the holy day of Yom Kippur. This conflict, which came to be known as the Yom Kippur War, was one of the most bloodiest and hard-fought wars in Israel's history, but perhaps one of the most miraculous as well, given the enemy's element of surprise and the sheer numbers that amassed against us. One of the most decorated heroes of the Yom Kippur War was a leader with the IDF Special Forces. His name was Moshe Levy. He's one of only 40 people in history to be awarded Israel's Gibor Yisrael Medal, Hero of Israel. It was his unit that defended the Budapest outpost, the only bunker on the Suez Canal to withstand the Egyptian attack. Sergeant Levy lost his arm during that battle. Now, a while back, Moshe Levy gave an interview, and he spoke about what happened that day. There was a total of 98 soldiers under his command. Of all 98 men, only one of them had professed to being religious or even believing in God for that matter. And he was a Yemenite Jew by the name of Zamdani. On the first Saturday after the outbreak of the war, Levy's unit was at the Budapest outpost and was told to expect a major offensive by the Egyptians with massive amounts of tanks and infantry. The general came and he spoke to Moshe Levy and he said, Moshe, you guys need to dig a line and come what may, you cannot let them get by you. Behind you, there is no one to stop their tanks from rolling all the way to Tel Aviv. Do you understand? You are the last line of defense. Sergeant Levy pleaded for reinforcements with which to meet the onslaught. He needed better munitions to which to take on their tanks, but he was told that none would be forthcoming. Israel was being attacked from all sides. They would all have to fight with what they had. They were on their own. Sure enough, as the hours passed, in the distance they heard a faint rumbling that started getting louder and louder. And then it came into view. 120 Egyptian tanks with who knows how many infantrymen marching behind them. At that point, one of the troops, a man named Avner, came up to Moshe Levy and he said, Moshe, how are we possibly going to stop those tanks with these rockets? Moshe is pondering the question, and Zandani suddenly steps forward, and in his hands is a Tehillim, a book of Psalms. And he announces to the entire unit, Chevra, guys, with this, we are going to stop the Egyptians. Hashem Elokeinu Imanu, the God of Israel, is with us, and we will prevail. He opened up the book of Psalms, and he started reading the Psalms aloud. At that moment, every one of those 98 soldiers, to a man, picked up his helmet that had been laying on the ground due to the heat, and they put it on their heads to serve as a kippah, as a yarmulke. They had no idea what Zandani was saying. The one thing they all knew was the word Amen. So after each verse that Zandani recited, they all cried out, Amen. In Sergeant Levy's words in this interview, he said, to hear a story about an event is one thing. To experience it firsthand is something else. I was there. I cannot begin to tell you how close to God every one of us felt at that moment. Zandani looked like this prophet of the Bible. He was crying out these words of the Psalms from King David. We were beyond religious. We were more than physical soldiers. We were Malachi Elokim. We were angels of God at that moment. I stopped Zandani for a second, and I stood up to address my unit. And I said, guys, when Avner asked me how we were going to stop those tanks, I had no answer for him. But Zandani has just given me the answer. We are not here just to protect Tel Aviv. We're here to protect the history of thousands of years. We are here to protect the past and the present and the future of our nation. I then told my troops that if I was going to make it out of this battle alive, I wanted to publicly promise that I will put on the tefillin every day for the rest of my life. Soon thereafter, the lull was over. The enemy approached, and the battle began. The tanks opened fire. The Israelis spread out and fired their bazookas and their mortars, while Zandani stood and yelled psalms through the explosions and through the smoke. We fired and fired while this Yemenite read the book of Psalms aloud, says Moshe Levy. Every shot we fired was a direct hit. Tanks were exploding all over the place. And then just as we were running out of ammunition and it looked like we were through, we looked up and we saw the Egyptians in full retreat. They just turned around and left. It was a clear and open miracle. Many of our guys were wounded in the battle, but none were killed. None except for one. Zandani, the reciter of the book of Psalms, the only religious one, the man that built our faith, the man who saved us all, was the only soldier that did not survive the battle. As for me, says Moshe Levy, my left arm, the very arm upon which I vowed moments earlier to place the tefillin, was blown off. I had no left arm anymore. I was in the hospital for many months afterwards. While certainly grateful for the miracles of that day, these two anomalies, Zandani dying and my arm being blown off, troubled me greatly. 2 years later, I was in the United States to be fitted for a prosthetic arm. And a friend of mine told me that he had been to Brooklyn to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and that the Rebbe told him that he wanted to see me. I was very reluctant at first, but in the end, my friend convinced me to go. I had an audience with the Rebbe. We spoke for the first 45 minutes about various aspects of Israel's security and its readiness, especially in light of the lessons learned from the Yom Kippur War. And I was astounded by the Rebbe's knowledge, by his insight, and of course, his warm eyes penetrated my soul. And finally, I worked up the courage to pose my questions, or lodge my protests, if you will. Why, Rebbe? Why? Of all the soldiers in my unit, why Zandani? Why was it the man of faith and inspiration who lost his life? And why, Rebbe, why? Why, of all the limbs that could have been taken from me, would it be the very arm upon which I pledged to put on tefillin? The Rebbe's eyes teared up. The Rebbe had such special place in his heart for every member of the IDF, and he would mourn the loss of each and every soldier. These were the loftiest, the holiest people who gave their lives al Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify God's name, to defend the holy land of Israel. And here was this great war hero asking the Rebbe the question of faith and suffering. The Rebbe responded, and I'm paraphrasing here, by the laws of nature, that was not a battle you could have or should have won. You saw that with your own eyes and you said so yourself. Zandani empowered each of you to reach above and beyond nature. He dedicated his life to something higher, rising above the constraints of the physical. He became one with God, a holy spiritual being, to the point that his physical body could no longer contain him. He gave his life so that the rest of you might live. As for you, you were not destined to survive that day either. You were going to be the second fatality of the battle. When that shrapnel came at you, it was headed for your heart or some other vital artery, and that would have been the end. But at that last second, your arm, the holy arm you pledged to do a mitzvah, became your shield. It absorbed the blast for the rest of you, and so you survived. You are a dynamic vessel of God's grace. Moshe Levy finishes the interview by saying, after 2 years of agonizing with this spiritual dilemma, I finally found my peace. No, we don't understand everything. And no, it's not okay. We don't like many things that happen. We don't make peace with the suffering or with the tragedy, but we do make peace with God. For it is that faith that gives us the capacity to deal and to cope with our grief. We have faith that indeed He has reasoning for everything. And although as a mere mortal, I cannot fathom why He would do such a thing, and I don't make peace with the suffering, nevertheless, ani ma'amin, I believe. Our faith motivates us to seek answers rather than to surrender to the suffering. The stronger our relationship is with God, the more strength we will have within ourselves to carry on. You see, living a life with God and following and keeping all of His commandments does not guarantee us that no pain will come our way in our lifetime. It doesn't shield us from all suffering, but it does make our relationship a strong one that would allow us to find the strength amidst the tears and amidst the pain. Without faith, I don't know how you can survive in today's world, not just during this crisis, but even in normal times. Because life is tough, it's rough. And as much as we want it to be like this sitcom, The characters always get in trouble in the beginning, and somehow at the end it all works out. Remember I Love Lucy? Lucy always gets into trouble, but somehow after 20 minutes and a dozen commercials, it always has this happy ending, and then da 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 da. That's all good. And we wish life was that way. But real life doesn't always work out that way. Some things take a long time to work out. Some take a lifetime. Some a generation. But when you're part of a world with a God directing it, at least you know that there is a plan. Without that faith, I don't know how you can survive. And as we focus on the difficult moments of life, we also have to remember that life has its good moments as well. In fact, it has some very great moments. And even amidst the broken hearts, and even amidst the pain and the suffering, we cannot lose sight and appreciation for the good that God has bestowed upon us, as well as the good and the kindness that our fellow man bestows upon us. When we wake up in the morning and we recite the Moda Ani and the morning blessings, they take on a whole new meaning for us. The miracle and the marvel of the human body. When we can't embrace our grandchildren physically right now, but we see them through these glass windows or doors, it should make us appreciative even more of the precious gift of the grandchildren that God gave us. We suddenly all miss our shuls and places of worship a lot more. And you know what? We miss each other. We miss our friends. We miss our community. Could you imagine facing what we're facing today without the gift of technology that allows these kinds of communications? The fact that we're having live lectures, the fact that our children have school online, WhatsApps and Facebooks and YouTubes and Zooms. I'm first learning all of this. But the gift of technology that God has given this world through the wisdom of man. During the crisis of 9/11, policemen and firemen and first responders became our heroes. Today's crisis, doctors and nurses and ambulance drivers, they're putting in shifts that are superhuman. And we learn to appreciate what perhaps we took for granted before. The caring that we all have now for our seniors of our community, doing shopping for them. We had a call from one of the local senior homes that the seniors are now stuck in their rooms. They won't even have them come out for assemblies and programs and dinners and breakfasts and lunch. They're all stuck in their room and they're frightened. And no one can come visit them. And so we put out one call and immediately puzzles and games and things for them to do in their rooms and letters from children to every single senior. We have become more loving. We've become more appreciative of the things we took for granted. So yes, there is real pain, but we have to separate pain and suffering from inconveniences, from kvetching. Yes, we Jews, we like to kvetch. We like to complain. It's been part of our culture since our ancestors in the wilderness experienced the miracle of the splitting of the sea. And then they, after seeing all these miracles, they turned to Moses and they said, and look how muddy our new sandals are. We know how to kvetch. Mr. Finkelstein suffers from pains in his chest and he's rushed to the fanciest, finest hospital in America, Massachusetts General. And for 7 days, he receives treatment there. And then without explanation, he checks out and has himself transferred to a small, rundown Jewish hospital in New York's Lower East Side. And the doctor on the ward is intrigued by his decision. What was wrong with Massachusetts General? Was it the doctors? Were the doctors not good? Mr. Finkelstein said the doctors were outstanding geniuses. I can't complain. Was it the nurses? Did the nurses not take care of you? The nurses, they were angels about the nurses. I can't complain. So was it the food? Too little food? They didn't give you enough? Was it too boring? Was it that? No, the food was the best ever. So tell me, Mr. Finkelstein, why did you leave one of the greatest hospitals in the world to come here? Finkelstein says, because here I can't complain. Kvetching is part of who we are, but we have to separate kvetching inconveniences from that which is real. And that's real tsaros that's going on. So we have to appreciate what we do have, and we have to thank God for it. It's like the old saying, I complained that I had no shoes until I met someone without legs. Faith allows us to see that life has meaning. A philosopher once said, he who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how. If we recognize that our life is of great importance and that every moment of life has meaning, even the dark moments. Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, writes concerning those who survived the concentration camps, and he says, it did not really matter what we expected from life, rather what life expected from us. So long as we still have meaning, so long as there's still purpose, we can go forward. This comes from faith. Deep down, we all know that God's there. And deep down, we all want to have a relationship, a close one with God. It's like a mother who's taking their child to a doctor for their immunization for an injection. And you have different time periods after a baby's born when you have to go in for the immunizations. The first trip, the baby's too young to understand anything. The baby goes without putting up a fight, gets the immunization, cries. The second trip also. But I'm telling you, even when the baby is 6 months old, 9 months old, they kind of figured it out. They know the direction that you're going. They know when you get off that exit, you're going to Kaiser. And they know what that's like. You get into that parking lot, they remember that parking lot. They remember the feel. And they get into the lobby. It smells the same way it smelled the last time I was here, and it wasn't good. And then they're waiting in that waiting room for a very long time until they hear the nurse saying your last name is pronouncing it most probably. And they finally make it into the room, and by now the baby knows this is not gonna be good. Because any moment now, that masked man is going to come in. And that masked man has a sharp instrument with him. And that masked man is going to take that sharp instrument and insert it into me, and it's going to hurt. So the baby begins to fetch and cry and scream the moment you get off that exit. And the crying gets louder and louder and louder as we get closer to the time of the immunization. And finally, the door opens, and it is that masked man again. And the baby begins to cry because the baby knows pain is coming. The baby does this, and every baby does the same. They give that stare, that look at their mommy's face. And they're saying, Mommy, help me. The masked man is going to hurt me. Please, Mommy, you kiss me 100 times a day. You tell me over and over, I love you, Bubba, I love you, I love you. You take my picture and you send it out and you show it to everyone that you meet, stranger or not. If you really love me, help me, get me out of here. And the mommy turns to the doctor and the mommy says, should I hold the baby down? And the doctor says, yeah, it'll help me a lot here. Hold them by the feet right over here. Just hold them by the feet until I'm done. As the baby tries kicking, and the baby gives that stare into mommy's face, who's now holding him down. As the masked man places that sharp instrument into his skin. And he cries out in the famous words of Julius Caesar, "Et tu, Brute? Mom, you're in on this. You're with him. What happened to the I love yous? How could you do this to me?" And at the very moment, here's the miracle of it all. At the very moment that the doctor pulls the injection out, pulls the needle out, as let down as the child is with their mommy, whose embrace does the child want more than anyone else? It wants mommy's hug. The baby is totally incapable of understanding anything about immunizations, how the shot is for their own benefit. All the baby knows is that he's under attack with a sharp instrument and that it hurts, and there's no question mommy is in on it. She's allowing the man to cause me terrible pain. And yet, I still want mommy's embrace. Because deep down, I know mommy loves me. I think we can understand the parable. Every once in a while, we get these difficult, painful injections, immunizations, and we don't understand. A baby and a mommy and a doctor are all finite human beings, and yet there is a gap of intelligence of what the baby can possibly understand. The gap between us and God is an infinite gap. We simply cannot understand. We don't understand why we have to get these immunizations, why there is pain, why there is suffering, and we cry out and we cry out. But the miracle of it all is that even amidst the pain and amidst the suffering, whose embrace do we want more than anyone's? We want God's embrace. I'll conclude with the story. One of the great teachers of Torah after the Holocaust was a Rosh Yeshiva headmaster named Rabbi Yisrael Zev Gusman. He headed up a yeshiva in Jerusalem. And in addition to delivering lectures to students, Rabbi Gusman used to give weekly lectures to lay people, amongst them attorneys and scientists and judges. And one of the regular attendees at Rav Gusman's class was a professor, Professor Robert Ullman, who in 2005 received the Nobel Prize in Economics. In June of 1982, Professor Ullman's son, Shlomo, a young father whose wife was expecting their second child, was called out to duty when the first war in Lebanon broke out. And tragically, Shlomo was killed in action before his child was born. Rav Gusman and all the students of the yeshiva attended the funeral. And after the burial, the elderly Rabbi Gusman walked amongst the grave sites of other Israeli soldiers killed in combat, his face twisted in anguish. All holy, every single one of them holy. And on the way home, Rav Gusman asked that he be taken to the home where the Ummans were sitting Shiva. And he came and he sat down next to the grieving father. And after a while, the professor said to the rabbi, I appreciate that you came to the cemetery. I know you have a schedule to keep, and I know how busy you are, so don't feel obligated to stay much longer here on account of me. Rav Gusman thought for a moment, and then he began to speak. And he said, I don't know if you know this, professor, but I had a son. His name was Meir. He was a beautiful little child. And the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, they grabbed him from my arms and they shot him in cold blood before my very eyes. I managed to escape. And later I bartered Meir's shoes for some food, but I could never bring myself to eat the food. So I gave it away to others. My Meir, he says to the professor, is a kadosh. He's a holy soul. He and all the 6 million that perished are kadoshim, they're holy souls. But you know something, professor? Every day, all I can think about are those shoes. The shoes of my Meir that were left in my hands. Every night before I go to sleep, I see those shoes. I don't know why. I cannot get those shoes out of my mind. I want you to know, he said to the professor, what's happening right now in the heavenly world. My Meir is welcoming your Shlomo into the minyan in heaven, the congregation of holy souls in the heavenly world. And he's saying to him, I died because I am a Jew, but I wasn't able to save anyone else. But you, Shlomo, You die defending your fellow Jews. My mayor is a member of the holy congregation in heaven. But your Shlomo, he is the leader of the congregation. He is the representative. He's the advocate of the Jewish people, in whose defense he gave his life. Rav Gustman paused, lowered his voice, and he said to the bereaved father, I never had the opportunity to sit Shiva for my mayor. So if it's okay on high, maybe tonight I'll see something besides his shoes. Professor Ullman looked up at Rav Gustman and he said with tears in his eyes, I thought I could never be comforted, but Rebbe, you comforted me. You gave me comfort. The Rebbe once met with a group of handicapped Israeli soldiers. That's what they were called. That was the name, the group of handicapped Israeli soldiers. And they came to see the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told them, the name of your group using the word handicap is an improper word, for it focuses only on the negative. The proper word is the word unique, for you are in a unique position. And God has a role for you to play in this world in the condition that you find yourself. Not a handicap role of unimportance, but a very unique role of tremendous importance. You see that what the Rebbe was teaching us, what I would like to leave you with tonight, is that one who has suffered tragedy, one who experiences pain, one who has seen suffering, is also in a unique position. As the Rebbe would teach us, we must translate pain into action and tears into growth. We must forge ahead. We must bring about change. We must work doubly hard to bring about more goodness so that others will not have to feel the pain that we are experiencing. We intensify our efforts for more kindness because we know how dark darkness can be. We must all double our efforts to bring light, and we must wage war against pain and suffering. God says to Moses after his bitter complaint, now is the time to go back to Pharaoh. Now is the time to battle for redemption. Now is not the time to give up, just the opposite. Now you will fight against evil, against exile, against the pain even more. Now that you know pain, you've seen it, you've tasted it, now you're in the best position to fight it. So where is God when it hurts? I'm sure you've all heard the tale of the fellow that comes to the heavenly world after his time in this world is up, and he's shown a videotape of his entire life. Only the body, you don't see the body, you don't see his body in the video. All you see is his footsteps in the sand. Wherever he goes, he's able to see the footsteps. And he says to the angel showing him the video, that's odd because I see a second set of footsteps wherever I go. Who was following me the whole time? And the angel says, don't you know, wherever you go, God was with you. So it's your footprints and God's footprints. And he continues to watch the video of his life, and he notices that every time he hit a time of difficulty, a time of crisis, a time of pain, a time of suffering, suddenly only one set of footprints appeared in the video. And again, he complains to the angel. He says, I don't understand. Every time I needed him most, he wasn't there. I'm all alone. And the angel says, silly man, at all those times in your life that you struggle with the most, you think you would have survived? God lifted you up and put you on his shoulders, and he carried you, and that's why you only see one set of footprints. Where is God when it hurts? He's right there with you. He's there with us. He's holding us. He's supporting us. Perhaps our eyes can't see him because it's so dark in the room. The Rebbe promised us that we have the ability to turn on the lights. That was his mission statement when he first became the Rebbe. That was his mission statement every day of his life to us. We can turn on the lights. We can bring an end to the darkness. The Rebbe told us that this is the generation of Mashiach. that we can bring an end to all pain, to all suffering, to all illness, and to all wars. We can bring about an era of spirituality, of godliness, of kindness, that it's within our hands, that it's this generation's mission to finish the job. The Rebbe never made a false claim in his life. The Rebbe would not give us false hopes. The Rebbe challenged us to step up to the plate and fulfill our task in the history of mankind. Now that we are seeing pain, we are seeing suffering, we must yell out so much louder, enough pain. We must demand it of God. We must mean it from the very depths of our hearts when we say we want Mashiach now. When we say Ad Mosai, how much longer? Now we mean it. Now we see it. Now we feel it. Now let's finish the job. There was a reporter from CNN that once came online for dollars, and he asked the Rebbe, "You're talking a lot about Mashiach. Is there a message that you have for me to pass on to the world?" And the Rebbe's message was simple. Tell the world Mashiach is ready to come. All it needs is your act of goodness and kindness. Let's go out. Let's do that act of goodness and kindness. How can we not? We can bring an end to all suffering.